What's up again, my friends? How y'all doing today? Thought about starting this video with 10 seconds of silence, and I thought, that's a long time. A long time to be silent in a video. It just occurred to me I wasn't going to do it specifically right now, but something I was thinking about last night is just how fast-paced everything is in this world, and how little patience we have, even when we're trying to train ourselves to be patient, to pause and to reflect, not just in discussion, but in our own minds, and to take the time out to ask ourselves basically what really matters to us, in the sense of have I done enough as an individual in my life? Am I satisfied with where I'm at? Am I satisfied with who I am? Do I feel like I've put in enough effort, and do I feel like I'm in the place where I want to be? Now, this is a very vague question, but we all ask it to ourselves at one time or another. And self-awareness is both a blessing and a curse. And I've done a lot of thinking about self-awareness and consciousness and what it might bring to the human race, what the point is, if there is one, whether nature evolved consciousness for a purpose or a reason. And the study of consciousness is one of the most difficult fields to understand, whether it be science or spiritually. It's trying to study something that you are, because you are the consciousness. So, as I said in a prior video, I asked, how do we know if we're wasting time? Well, I came to the conclusion, of course, that it's subjective, that wasting time is something that the individual chooses to do, or by how they think of the time they spent. For example, one person may spend a couple of years, at a retreat in some mountain village, learning some Zen Buddhism. And one person might consider that a complete waste of time. Whereas the person who does it might think, wow, the waste of time is going and working on Wall Street as this person's doing and trying to make a fortune for themselves, realizing it will never bring them happiness. And both of them are right and wrong. No individual can seem to set a standard for what works for all people. So what may work in the mountains for one works in the city for another. There are some basic premises we agree on, I guess. Some basic values, and they're very vague. The idea of don't harm others. Some people resort to the Ten Commandments, which I find a little absurd, because in the sense that, we shouldn't covet thy neighbor's goods. Basically, that means don't want what somebody else has. That's basically making you feel guilty the minute that you have that feeling. Because when you see someone else that has something that you want, it's usually because it's something that would make your life more comfortable. So, for example, if you see somebody with a Mercedes and you want that Mercedes, well, maybe ask yourself, what's the point? Is it a status symbol? Maybe it is ridiculous. But if you're merely hungry and you're coveting thy neighbor's sandwich, that's something that comes natural. Or if you covet somebody who has a house, covet a house that doesn't have a leaky roof or flood every year. So these are just basic ideas, human rights and human needs, the need to be comfortable. And so many people are confused about what they should be doing with their lives, why they've been left behind by either friends and family or their own government or the world in general. A lot of this comes down to perception. If we see the world as a scary place versus an amazing place, it could be both amazing and scary. And depending on where you live, your circumstances will differ from others. So, I guess there's some basic truths and some simple pleasures that we all share. It's hard to deny that the smell of a rose is, I don't know anybody who thinks, oh, that's disgusting and roses are ugly, right? Do we know why? Do we know why they're beautiful or why we're attracted to certain smells? Not really. Of course, we could get into the science of it. There are terpenes within different flowers and plants, and these different terpenes have a different effect on the body and the mind, and perhaps interact with other molecules in our bodies. There's beliefs that terpenes affect the way that cannabis affects us, and that smelling terpenes can change our mood. But then there's a whole resistance to that, saying, oh, essential oils are all bullshit and none of it really does anything. And these are just all examples of just the differences of opinion, but also the things that confuse us as individuals. We want to believe something so strongly, and then we find out it's bullshit, for example. It's hard to find a flow state. It's hard to find a state of no thought and to process information. Sometimes the processing of information can be the most important thing that we do. And I keep reading that and hearing that. Or the times when we're down, when we feel like we're not doing anything or getting anything accomplished, perhaps we can just be preparing to get something done. Maybe that's just a cop-out, But the alternative to pondering and considering life is to just live it, and work. In other words, working towards something we don't even know what yet. Progress is an illusion. It's the illusion that we're all working towards something great, but we're not quite sure what that is yet. Some people may say utopia, that we want a utopian society, but I don't think anyone really believes in that, do they? I mean, it's in the eye of the beholder. If we're picturing rainbows and unicorns, it's just not the way that the world is. I mean, humans could become completely passive, sure. But, for example, we will still have to protect ourselves against the environment, against animals, and we will, still run into the same problems that we've always had. The earth doesn't give a shit if you decide, hey, I'm going to be peaceful. It'll still kick your ass. And that's another kind of angle I wanted to go into, because I grew up in the 90s in this kind of hippie movement, 80s and 90s, and in the early 90s I was a teenager, and there was this resurgence of tie-dyes, and I went to the Dead shows when Jerry was still with the band, and really kind of fell in love with that scene, and met a lot of pretentious hippies talking about chakras and all this along the way. Over the years, I kind of grew into this alternative lifestyle where I was always kind of, I love the idea of being peaceful, being a pacifist, being calm and collected, but I never left this part of myself that said, if you fuck with me, you cross me, I'm gonna defend myself and protect myself. I never put up with people's bullshit, but there was a brief time when I tried that. I tried the love and light. I tried to live with a peaceful mindset where I was always sharing positive thoughts and not talking about the negative. And that doesn't work, because we have to express ourselves how we truly are. In other words, I'm not trying to live up to someone else's standards or values of what they think is peaceful. But what you find is that, anyhow, a lot of these people who talk about abandoning the ego and not wanting anything and being extremely minimal. I have nothing wrong with minimalism. In fact, I totally respect it. It's when people use it as a as a chip. When people say, well, this is what I associate with. This is my political affiliation, my politics, the identity politics that we play. So being a certain type of, in the healer community or the hippie community, or you can look from the outside into the business world and to Wall Street and to society and to politics and point the finger and say, look at all these idiots living their lives just mindlessly working. I'd rather go out and travel with the dead or go to festivals. Any half-brained person can realize quickly that without that society, those events don't exist. Without the workers, there's nobody to cook the food for the fair. There's nobody to build the booths. There's, you could say, well, public will chip in and do these things, but we don't. It's very difficult to organize as a group. And so what I'm saying is that there's a little bit of truth in everything. I still carry that fuck society attitude, but at the same time realize that it's what holds some of that is the glue that holds it together. But that fabric is woven and interwoven with some very horrible threads, and once you pull one of those threads out, the rest of it falls apart. So, in other words, it's not about abandoning capitalism or abandoning socialism or joining this group or joining that group. I mean, everybody's got their they're positives that they can add to the discussion, but really everybody's full of shit. And most of us know that. So, back to the ego, I hear people talk about, we should abandon the ego, and the problem is ego and separation. We realize that we're one. Look, believe me, I've had some mystical experiences where I felt so at one with the world and the universe, and I have no doubt that we are all from the same source, and that we will all return to that same source. But in the meantime, nature has decided to separate us for some purpose, or no purpose. But if there is a purpose behind it, then separation is the part of it. That is the uniqueness of each individual is to be celebrated, not to be... it's kind of like the hipster syndrome, where people don't want to be like everybody else, so they start dressing like a hipster, and then they end up looking like everyone else. And it's the reason why that's always such a good metaphor is because that's how everybody, in the hippie groups were the beatniks, everybody wants to be different, and then they end up being the same. And that's the desperate attachment, that ambivalence about wanting to be unique, but at the same time fit into a group and be part of something better. And nobody seems to know which group has the best ideas, And so it breeds low self-esteem in community. And I don't really have an answer here. I guess I'm just kind of rambling, but nobody really has an answer. And I guess that's the point. I think living neutrally and having fun in life is important. But you can't ignore the negatives that are going to come your way, the bad times. You have to make your own luck. There are no lucky people. There are people that make their luck. You make your skills. You meet people. You talk to people. Sure, some people do get lucky, of course. But the idea of utopia, so I can kind of sum that up, is that I do believe in a better future, but just not the idea of a utopia without the idea that progress in today's world always leads to a decline. We're heading to the age of decadence, where Rome was, where we support unconditionally what people tell us, we don't question anything, and we're kind of gluttonous and just don't care. And not all of society is that way. Most people do care. That's the thing. It's easy for us to just judge the rest of society, but really most people care. They just don't know what to do. The system is consuming itself right now. So we're living in a time, and the reason why it's so hard to know what we should be doing and why we're so confused is because there was a time when we were told this is what the future is going to entail. If you work and you retire, you can, collect Social Security, whatever the story may have been for the individual. Today we're told, there won't be any Social Security left. Most of the jobs will be gone in the next 20 years, and by the way, you owe $200,000 on your student loans, and there aren't any jobs. So, can we blame society for being pissed off, being confused and upset and misdirected and feeling lied to? No, but there's nothing we can do about it. Except as individuals realize, holy shit, man. We're cannibalizing ourselves as a society. We might as well enjoy the ride. And in a way that sounds selfish, but we've privatized war, education, public services. Pretty much everything's just been, bidded out. And what's left for us to define ourselves as really even a nation, let alone the whole world system, the whole world economy. On one hand, globalism, for example, benefits a few, but ends up, in theory would benefit the people, but in practice only benefits large corporations. Large corporations that just want to dominate markets in every other country. And so, anyhow, to wrap this up, nobody knows the purpose of life. Nobody understands why we're here. And that's a statement that I can truly say with confidence today. I'm sure a lot of you will disagree, and I totally have no problem with that, because most of the world disagrees with me. Because if there's one thing humans are good at, it's pretending that we know what we're talking about. And it's very difficult when somebody's telling you, well, nobody really knows. It's easy to just say that person's an idiot. They just haven't figured it out. They haven't learned the secret, the big trick. But when you've been down all these roads and you've seen it for what it is, you start to say, well, if there's one thing I do stand by, it's that everyone else's answer seems like bullshit to me. So another thing to note is regrets are a waste of time. We take note of the past, the things that we've done right and wrong, and we learn from that. You know, you don't carry your trophies around with you and say, "Oh, look what I've accomplished." But some people are really hung up on that kind of thing. You know, there are a lot of people who ride their ego to the point where, you know, every only thing that matters is how they come across to others. Not the ego as being an individual, but the ego as being better than other people. And those people live sad lives, I'm sure. I can't imagine being like that. I could be wrong. Maybe they are happy. Maybe that kind of ignorance is bliss. And there are people who dominate the world for their whole lives and treat everybody else like shit. And maybe they're truly happy. I really don't know. But I don't feel like I would be. I have too much empathy, and if I lost that, I feel like I wouldn't be the same person. So, don't let other people tell you how to feel, either. That's the biggest one I wanted to share. I've fallen for this a lot in my life. You know, not anybody in particular telling me how to feel, but society, observing. It's like we're all children growing up, and even as an adult, if you're open-minded, you're looking at other people saying, well, this person's more passive in this way, and this person seems like more aggressive, and boy, this explanation sure looks good over here, and that one just, I don't know, I don't believe that anymore. And if you're honest with those things, you can say, well, hold on a minute, you know. We're being told what we should feel about what. Whether, not just by the government, but by each other. And this is why so many people are frustrated at the, say, extreme left with the whole free speech issue and trying to change words. Like, well, I was joking around about this the other day, you know, saying that they're trying to get rid of the word retard. Of course, we've been trying to get rid of that for years. I have no problem saying it. If you say it, I should say, if you say retard, it's insulting, in my opinion. If you say retarded when you're describing someone's condition, it's an easy way to, okay, they're retarded, mentally retarded. That means they're held back and unable to, but we're so hung up on the word. The other day I read an article of words that we should stop using, and one of them was gypped. Said, oh, well, gypped comes from the gypsies who, you know, and it goes on the story of where the gypsies are from and how it's not fair to address them all as, you know, thieves, and using the word gypped, you know, is offensive to gypsies. And my whole thought was, I don't care. All the gypsies I've ever met have stolen or have done, you know, not all the people from where they're from, Romania, right, are gypsies. But the gypsies that do form these groups, yeah, it's almost like an organized mob mentality. So the idea that we can't offend people who have harmed us in the past, that's a hard one. That's where it becomes a little more touchy around words. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but a couple really funny ones came to mind. I should write them down because I definitely wanted to share that. Damn it, I wish I could remember. Oh yeah, I was studying ancient Rome and the collapse of the Roman Empire, and it was talking about the Goths and the I can't remember the other group, but anyway. There was an insulting term that's used. Anyway, I'm just thinking out loud, I guess, at this point. So we're all one, but we have separate egos. I'm trying to take all these notes, think about all these last minute things. I had a couple notes written down. What is the initial thing that I wanted to talk about that I never even mentioned is spiritual bypassing. And that's when people basically use spirituality as a way to get over traumatic events or PTSD or feeling a certain way about life or get away from responsibility by kind of just joining a commune or a mentality, or it doesn't have to be a group, but kind of a group mentality. These are the people who would say, well, you just need your chakras aligned, and oh, I can see your aura, and if you doubt them at all, they're like, you're just not advanced enough, and oh, you're in denial, and oh, the darkness around, the people will convince themselves of anything. I'm not saying that none of these things exist. I believe in energy centers in the body, but the Western version of these colored chakras is complete nonsense. That's not the original, I won't get into that, but it's spiritual bypassing is like spiritual avoidance, and it allows us to kind of escape responsibility. But I wanted to say that I would say maybe the opposite of that would be occupational bypassing. And that's where a person works their ass off to make more and more and more money and buy more and more and more things, thinking that that's going to bring them out of the same pain. And it doesn't. It's like finding a halfway, a medium. The one thing we really want is purpose. So we want something to work towards. So dismissing others' beliefs is not my intention as far as the whole spiritual thing. I'd rather talk to somebody who believes crystals have energy than somebody that believes God's going to strike someone dead and send them to hell. It may be a little woo-woo on both sides, but I do respect people's opinion. I guess the final question, two things, I guess. It's not what you know, really, but how you use it. And that's the one most valuable lesson that I've learned. And it's not the amount of things you know. Knowledge can be a burden. It's how we use it. And sometimes we can't see how that's going to come together in the future. So if you are confused, if you're lost, if you're wondering what your path is, nobody's going to be able to tell you that, but you can learn from a few teachers. You just have to find ones that work for you. And the last note is, let's just say we were given the answer to this question of what is the purpose or reason of life. Would you want the answer? And before you answer that out loud and say, of course I would, think about this. What makes life worth living is not knowing and getting up each morning with new questions and new curiosities. If we already knew our destination, if we already knew our paths to get there, if we already were convinced that we would be completely open to do whatever we want in this life and have no fear of losing anything, or we could take another, start over, whatever it may be. If you could be given the actual reason for existence and the future of the universe and past, would you really want it? And I absolutely would not. For the same reason I wouldn't go to a psychic, or I have no desire to have my tarot cards read, or the future. Because the future is what it is. And that's the realization I've come to, in my life. I'm not going to be able to change that. I can change my future by, I guess not change my future. I can direct where I end up in the future by my actions, and hopefully I make the right ones. But there are going to be times where you wonder if you're just playing for the crowd. You wonder, why am I doing this? Why am I a part of this? And you realize that you can't run away from your responsibilities. You can't run away from society, because you still have loved ones and you still have things that you want to accomplish in life. But if you embrace the whole system completely without question, then perhaps we become part of the problem by not addressing it. Because the real problems that we do have will never be fixed if we don't address them. So that's the end of my ramble. And hope you all have a wonderful day. I think that's all I've got to say. Say, find your flow state and try periods of no thought. Try to sit in silence for a few minutes. And just let your mind do what it does. Try to quiet that background chatter. It's hard, but it can be done. We're all learning together. Talk to y'all later. Have a good one.